Drug controllers had never seen anything like ecstasy. Positive word of mouth pushed the drug far beyond the confines of the rave scene. In the late 1990s, illegal traffic in the drug exploded.
When I first started prosecuting ecstasy cases, 10,000 pills was considered to be a huge amount of that drug, of the ecstasy drug. Now, that's a drop in the bucket. Couriers bring in 30,000 pills at a time. Organizations bring in hundreds of thousands of pills. The leaders of these organizations are charged with smuggling millions of pills, and it almost seems like each one outdoes the next.
If we're seizing millions of dosage units at a time, and we're seeing ecstasy being used all over the country, I have to believe, and my assessment is, that the abuse of ecstasy is rampant throughout the country.
Well, here's the troubling reality that the DEA now faces. Making ecstasy illegal did little to halt its spread. And in the last 10 years, the government has been trying to convince the millions of Americans who use it, and the millions who might, that they are putting themselves at risk.
It is a myth that ecstasy is a benign, fun drug.
This is not a benign, fun drug. Even occasional use or a single use is like playing Russian roulette with your own brain.
In the late 1990s, Dr. Alan Leshner, as head of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, or NIDA, led the government's eventual response to ecstasy.
There's no question that for some people, even a single use of ecstasy is going to be extremely dangerous. My observation is that this drug has been particularly glorified in many different venues. Certainly in the youth culture, it's treated as the hug drug, the love drug. It has all kinds of qualities to it. And in the course of that glorification, advocates for the drug have downplayed the risks associated to it. The risks are real.
This postcard was the government's opening salvo in its war against ecstasy, Your Brain After Ecstasy. According to NIDA, the image on the left is a healthy brain, while the brain on the right, which appears dull and full of holes, is said to be showing the effects of ecstasy on serotonin, a brain chemical that regulates mood and sleep and appetite.
I did the Brain on Ecstasy campaign. I believed that if you could show young people a concrete example of something that that substance does to a critical organ in your body, that they would then do the cost-benefit analysis in a more sophisticated way, and they might decide not to try this drug or not to use the drug repeatedly.
Anything that damages the structure of the brain or the central nervous system has to be viewed and used with extreme caution.
This is Dr. George Ricarte, the scientist whose work the government has cited repeatedly in its campaign against ecstasy. In 1998, he published the first study to claim that ecstasy causes brain damage in humans. This research was the source of the brain images on the NIDA postcard. Dr. Ricarte's study, paid for by the government and conducted at Johns Hopkins University, suggested that ecstasy users risk losing up to 85% of their brain's serotonin function. 4 years later, Ricarte published another study paid for by the government. This time he claimed that humans could develop Parkinson's disease from what his study called one common recreational dose of ecstasy, the amount that ravers were thought to consume during one night of dancing. The government's headline, based almost entirely on the work of Dr. Ricarte, was chilling. Ecstasy users risk catastrophic brain damage.
It's a psychoactive substance, and just for lack of a better term, turns your brain into Swiss cheese, cuts holes in it, does permanent brain damage, and it's irreversible from the very first time. So the great fear is that we could have a generation of people that have abused this drug that appear to be stroke victims and can't even care for themselves by the time they reach their 40th or 50th birthday.
I don't think there's any doubt that some people have been scared away from MDMA use by what they've been told. They saw that picture of holes in the brain and they said, okay, not my brain. So I think that the, if you will, the propaganda effort has had its impact. It competes rather poorly, though, with word of mouth. Particularly, again, when there are old users out there saying, no, not as far as I could tell.
I've taken MDMA 100 times over the last 20 years. I feel fine. There are millions of people who have taken MDMA and don't obviously look brain damaged. Somehow in our culture, we've developed this belief in science so much so that we ignore the evidence in front of our own eyes.
When I read some of the stuff that's printed by the government these days about ecstasy, I just laugh. I just break up laughing. I mean, you know, I've read that one pill can cause Parkinson's disease and things like this, and it's like, wow, I know thousands of people that have taken thousands of them, and I don't know anybody that's had Parkinson's disease.